The air in the room hung thick, suffocating. Sweet and cloying like the buttercream frosting on the three-tiered cake, but laced with something sharper, something metallic and acrid that only I seemed to taste. Laughter tinkled, a brittle sound like shattering glass, and the murmur of conversations washed over me, a tide of polite smiles and veiled judgments. My hands felt clammy around the delicate teacup, the porcelain cool against my trembling fingers. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the bay window, painting long, distorted shadows across the polished floorboards of my sister Sarah's ridiculously perfect house. It was her bridal shower, a monument to her flawless life, her impending perfect marriage, her victory in the invisible, lifelong competition she insisted we were in. I had dressed in a soft blue dress, hoping to fade into the background, a quiet observer in the spectacle of her joy. But the spotlight, or at least a harsh, unwelcome glare, always seemed to find me. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. My life, up until that suffocating afternoon, had been a series of quiet battles and small, hard-won victories that always seemed to shrink to nothing when placed alongside Sarah's effortless triumphs. She was the older sister, the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who sailed through life collecting accolades and admirers like seashells. I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who stumbled and scraped her knees. We were two branches from the same tree, but she reached for the sun while I grew in the shade, perpetually slightly bent. Our childhood was a subtle landscape of her dominance and my quiet retreat. If I got a good grade, she got a better one. If I made a friend, she effortlessly absorbed them into her orbit. It wasn't malicious, not overtly, not always. It was just
Sarah.
She had a way of dimming your light simply by standing next to you, a natural, radiant eclipsing that left you feeling insignificant. As we grew older, the landscape shifted from schoolyards and shared bedrooms to relationships and careers. My career was stable, fulfilling in its own quiet way, working with numbers, building things piece by piece. Hers was glamorous, fast-paced, demanding, everything she was. My relationships were complicated, messy, often ending in heartbreak that she would dissect with a pitying head tilt and thinly veiled, "I told you so's." She, of course, had a string of perfect boyfriends, culminating in the man she was about to marry, a successful lawyer, handsome, from a good family. He was, in short, everything Sarah deserved, everything she had been aiming for since she was old enough to map out her future like a military campaign. I had built a life I was proud of, a life with deep roots and a quiet strength. I had my small apartment filled with books and art, a network of true friends who saw me, really saw me, and a sense of peace that had taken years to cultivate. But Sarah had a knack for finding the one crack in your armor, the one insecurity you thought you'd patched up, and pressing down hard. And my perceived failure to find lasting romantic partnership, my lack of a future husband, as she so delicately put it, had become her favorite weapon. It was the one area where her life shone brightest and mine seemed dimmest, a perpetual reminder that I hadn't achieved the ultimate, according to her metric, mark of success, being chosen. The invitation to the bridal shower had arrived like a summons. A heavy, embossed cardstock decreeing my required attendance at the celebration of Sarah's impending nuptials. Declining wasn't an option. Family obligations, the fear of fueling her narrative that I was antisocial or jealous, trapped me. I RSVP'd with a tight smile, already feeling the familiar clench in my stomach. I knew what it would be. A room full of her friends, her mother's friends, distant cousins, all basking in Sarah's glow, and me, the unmarried sister, an anomaly, a point of pity or curiosity. Every conversation would circle back, inevitably, to her fiancé, her wedding plans, her perfect future. And then, perhaps, a polite, perfunctory inquiry about my life, quickly dismissed. The day arrived, gray and overcast, a mirror to my mood. I drove to her house, the grand, sprawling Tudor that felt less like a home and more like a museum of Sarah's achievements, each carefully curated piece a testament to her curated life. Stepping inside was like entering a different atmosphere. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the murmur of polite conversation. The house was adorned with white roses and silver ribbons, a vision of bridal purity and elegance that felt less like a celebration and more like a performance. Sarah, in a pristine white dress, circulated the room, radiant and effortless, accepting congratulations and gifts with a practiced grace. She looked untouchable, happy in a way that felt both genuine and weaponized. I found a quiet corner, nursing my teacup, making small talk with people I barely knew, deflecting gentle probes about my own love life with vague smiles. It was a carefully choreographed dance I had performed many times. The questions were always the same, delivered with varying degrees of genuine interest or thinly veiled nosiness. Anyone special in your life? Are you seeing anyone? You're so lovely. I can't imagine why you haven't found someone. Each question a tiny pinprick, reminding me of the perceived deficit. I had become adept at the deflection, the quick change of subject, the polite laugh that didn't reach my eyes. Then, Sarah drifted over, her entourage of bridesmaids trailing behind her like a train. She looked at me, her smile wide, but her eyes holding that familiar, assessing gleam. "Oh, there you are," she said, her voice carrying just slightly over the general chatter. "Hiding in the corner?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, designed to highlight my perceived awkwardness, my lack of belonging in her perfect tableau. I offered a weak smile. "Just enjoying the moment," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. She laughed, a clear, bell-like sound. "Oh, I know, darling. It's a lot, isn't it? All this. Future." She gestured around the room, encompassing the gifts, the flowers, the collective anticipation of her wedding. Then she leaned in, her voice dropping slightly, but still audible to her nearby audience. "But don't worry," she whispered, though it felt like a shout. "Your time will come." And then she added, the words dripping with saccharine sympathy, the final, cruel twist of a knife. "At least I have a future husband." The air solidified in my lungs. The room tilted. The cloying sweetness of the cake turned to ash in my mouth. "At least I have a future husband." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just a casual remark. It was a distillation of every dismissive look, every backhanded compliment, every moment she had used her relationship status, her impending marriage, to highlight my lack thereof. It was a public declaration of her superiority, delivered with a smile that twisted her features into something I barely recognized. In that moment, surrounded by her friends and family, she wasn't just mocking my relationship status. She was mocking me. My life, my choices, my worth. She was saying, without saying it, that this was the only thing that mattered, and I had failed. A wave of heat flooded my face, followed by a sudden, bone-deep chill. My vision narrowed. The laughter around me seemed to fade, replaced by a roaring in my ears. I gripped the teacup tighter, my knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this room, this house, this crushing weight of her judgment. But I was frozen. Stuck in the spotlight she had so gleefully shone on me. The faces of the other guests blurred around the edges, curious, expectant. What would the unmarried sister do? Would she cry? Would she lash out? Would she crumble? My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Years of conditioning, of biting my tongue, of minimizing her barbs, rose up. The familiar script dictated that I smile, make a self-deprecating joke, and retreat. But something inside me snapped. A hard, brittle sound, like ice breaking. Not anger, not immediately. Something colder, something sharper. A sudden, crystal-clear understanding. She wasn't just being thoughtless. This was deliberate. This was the point. Her ultimate victory lap, designed to make me feel small and inadequate on her biggest day. I managed a shaky breath, forcing the air into my aching lungs. The scent of roses suddenly felt suffocating. My mind raced, searching for an escape, a witty retort, anything to deflect the crushing weight of her words. But my tongue felt thick and useless. All I could do was stand there, exposed, the target of her casual cruelty. The silence stretched, pregnant with expectation. Sarah watched me, her smile unwavering, that triumphant glint in her eyes. She had landed her blow, and now she was waiting for me to reel. The moments stretched into an eternity. The smile remained fixed on her face, a mask of perfect happiness that barely concealed the sharp edge beneath. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden tension in the air, though perhaps not fully understanding its depth. For them, it might have seemed like a sisterly tease. For me, it was a lifetime of being measured and found wanting, compressed into a single, devastating phrase. The warmth drained from my face, leaving it feeling stiff and cold. My hands, still clutching the teacup, felt detached from my body. Inside, a storm raged. Not the kind that breaks things, but the kind that huddles inward, gathering force. Every past slight, every dismissive word, every time she had overshadowed me, flashed through my mind like a dark, disturbing montage. The doll I loved that she broke and then blamed on me. The college she helped me choose that was entirely wrong for me. The boyfriend she flirted with relentlessly until he became her boyfriend. The job interview she helped me prepare for by pointing out all my weaknesses. It wasn't just one thing. It was a mosaic of small cuts, administered over decades, leaving behind a landscape of scars. And now, this public assertion that my life was less valuable, less complete, because I lacked what she had. The injustice of it was a physical ache. I had worked hard for everything I had. I had built my life from the ground up, navigating challenges she had never had to face, picking myself up after setbacks she had never experienced. And yet, here I was being judged and found wanting based on a single, external metric, marriage. Her metric. The one she held up as the ultimate prize, conveniently forgetting all the other ways a life could be rich and full. My gaze flickered across the faces in the room. Some were looking at Sarah, admiring her. Some were looking at me, with pity or curiosity, or perhaps even a hint of schadenfreude. I saw my mother, her face a mask of polite neutrality, unwilling or unable to step into the fray. This was the dynamic of our family. Sarah's needs and desires always took precedence, and everyone else adjusted. My father wasn't there, traveling for work as usual, another constant in my life, his physical absence often mirroring his emotional distance, leaving me to navigate Sarah's gravitational pull largely on my own. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Sarah's smile began to tighten around the edges, a flicker of impatience crossing her face. She expected a reaction. Tears, perhaps. A defensive outburst. Something she could dismiss or control. She wanted me to confirm her narrative, to act the part of the pathetic, unmarried sister she had cast me as. But something different was happening inside me. The storm wasn't breaking. It was solidifying, turning from turbulent wind and rain into a hard, unyielding core. The pain was still there, sharp and visceral, but it was overlaid with something new, something cold and clear. Resignation? No. Determination. A quiet, fierce resolve that hardened my spine and stilled the trembling in my hands. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I wasn't going to play her part. I met her gaze, not with defiance, but with a stillness that seemed to unnerve her slightly. Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. The air in the room shifted again, the tension coiling tighter. I took another slow breath, consciously slowing my racing heart. The scent of roses, the tinkle of laughter, the murmur of voices, it all seemed to sharpen, becoming incredibly vivid, like a photograph suddenly brought into focus. I saw the delicate lace on Sarah's dress, the way the light caught the diamonds on her finger, the carefully arranged flowers on the tables. Every detail of her perfect, staged reality. And in that moment, standing in the center of her carefully constructed world, I realized something. Her mockery wasn't just about me. It was about her own fear. Her desperate need to feel superior, to validate her choices by belittling mine. Her perfect life was built on a foundation of comparison, constantly needing someone else's perceived failure to make her own successes shine brighter. And I had been the convenient, ever-present benchmark. This realization didn't soften the blow of her words, but it changed its nature. It wasn't just an attack, it was a defense. A desperate attempt to shore up her own sense of worth by tearing mine down. And understanding that, truly understanding it, gave me a strange sense of power. Not the kind of power she wielded, built on external validation and the subjugation of others, but a quiet, internal power. The power of seeing things clearly. The power of knowing my own worth, independent of her judgment. I didn't have a witty comeback ready. I didn't have a grand speech planned. All I had was the sudden, absolute certainty that I wouldn't let her define me. Not anymore. Not in this room. Not ever again. The years of quiet suffering, of internalizing her narrative, ended in that moment. I wasn't going to shrink. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to let her win. I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch, letting her squirm slightly under the unexpected lack of reaction. The polite murmuring in the room resumed, but the tension around Sarah and me remained palpable. She tried to recover, her smile widening again, too wide, too forced. "Well," she said, her voice a little too bright, "I should go check on the caterers. Enjoy the party." And with that, she turned, sweeping away with her entourage, leaving me standing there, exposed but strangely unbowed. But the pain was still there, a raw wound beneath the newfound resolve. Her words echoed in my head, "At least I have a future husband." It was a casual cruelty that cut deeper than any open insult. It wasn't just about marriage. It was about the future itself. She implied my future was empty, devoid of the central pillar she considered essential. It was a negation of my potential, my hopes, my dreams. It felt like a door slamming shut, sealing me in a room she had decreed was barren. Walking through the rest of the shower felt like navigating a minefield. Every conversation, every glance, seemed filtered through the lens of Sarah's remark. I saw pity in some eyes, curiosity in others. I heard the hushed whispers that stopped abruptly as I approached. The carefully chosen small talk felt hollow, meaningless. I ate a slice of the perfect cake, the sweetness turning bitter on my tongue. I watched Sarah open her gifts, oohing and awing over the expensive lingerie and crystal vases, each gift a tangible representation of the future she was building, the future she had just implied I would never have. The feeling of being an outsider intensified with every passing minute. I was the anomaly, the unmarried sister in a room full of women celebrating marriage. The air grew heavier, thicker, harder to breathe. I longed for the escape, the anonymity of my own quiet apartment, the solitude where I didn't have to pretend, didn't have to deflect, didn't have to wear a mask of composure. The strength I had felt earlier began to waver, chipped away by the relentless social pressure, the constant reminder of my perceived lack. I considered leaving, slipping out the back door, pleading a headache, anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere. But the thought of the questions, the explanations, the confirmation that her comment had indeed wounded me, stopped me. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I would see it through. I would endure. But the resolve felt brittle now, fragile. The hard core I had found earlier seemed to be dissolving under the relentless pressure, leaving behind the familiar landscape of hurt and inadequacy. Every joke about wedding planning felt like a dig. Every mention of the big day was a reminder of the day I might never have. Sarah, oblivious or perhaps deliberately so, continued to be the radiant center of attention, her happiness a spotlight that seemed to highlight my own perceived unhappiness. I felt trapped, cornered, with no way out and no way to defend myself against a weapon as insidious as pity wrapped in a smile. The hours stretched on, each one an agonizing crawl. I participated in the silly shower games, forced a smile during the gift opening, made polite conversation that felt like lifting weights. The constant performance was exhausting. My face ached from the effort of holding the smile, my chest tight with suppressed emotion. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in a sea of white lace and forced joy. Her words, "At least I have a future husband," played on repeat in my mind, a cruel, insidious mantra. My earlier resolve felt like a distant memory. The clarity I had found vanished, replaced by the familiar fog of self-doubt and inadequacy. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Maybe I was destined to be the unmarried sister, the perpetual outsider, watching from the sidelines as others built their lives, their families, their futures. The thought was a cold, heavy weight in my stomach, dragging me down. As the shower neared its end, the energy in the room shifted. People began to gather their things, exchanging goodbyes, making plans for the wedding. Sarah was surrounded, basking in the glow of her impending nuptials, the picture of perfect happiness. I stood near the door, waiting for a polite moment to slip away, my own carefully wrapped gift for her feeling heavy and inadequate in my hands. Sarah caught my eye and beckoned me over.
My heart sank.
Another performance? Another barbed comment? I walked towards her, my steps heavy, feeling like I was walking into a trap. She smiled, a tired but still radiant smile. "Oh, good, you're still here," she said, her voice pitched for her immediate audience. "We were just talking about the seating chart for the wedding. It's so complicated," she sighed dramatically, a performance of charming stress. "Honestly, figuring out where to put all the single people is the hardest part. We've got a whole table of," she paused, glancing at me, and then back at her friends, a small, conspiratorial smile playing on her lips. "Eligible bachelors, of course, but it's always tricky with the single women, isn't it? You don't want them to feel left out." The emphasis on left out was subtle, but the meaning was clear. Another dig, delivered with a wink and a smile, painting me as one of the sad, solitary figures she had to accommodate. The familiar sting of her words, delivered so casually, so publicly, lanced through me. It wasn't just about the seating chart. It was another reminder of my status, of my lack, framed as a logistical problem for her perfect wedding. My carefully constructed composure wavered. I felt the heat rush back to my face, my eyes prickling. This was it. This was her final victory lap, humiliating me one last time before she sailed off into her perfect married future. But then something shifted. A spark of that earlier, cold resolve ignited in the ashes of my hurt. She wanted me to feel left out? She wanted me to feel like a problem to be solved, a difficulty on her seating chart?
No.
Absolutely not. Not anymore. I looked at her radiant, smug face, and a quiet, steely determination settled over me. This wasn't just about enduring anymore. This was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about showing her and everyone else that my life wasn't a problem to be solved, and I wasn't someone to be pitted or accommodated. The plan had been a secret, a quiet conversation between me and David, born not of malice, but of a shared desire for a simple, authentic start to our life together, away from the scrutiny and judgment that had always shadowed my relationships. We had met months ago, not through mutual friends or dating apps, but through a shared love for obscure jazz music in a dimly lit club downtown. Our connection had been immediate, deep, and surprisingly easy. David was everything Sarah's parade of boyfriends and her fiancé were not. He was kind, quiet, fiercely intelligent, and he saw me. Not the sister of Sarah, not the unmarried woman, but me. He loved my quiet strength, my dry humor, my complicated history. He didn't try to fix me. He just loved me exactly as I was. We had talked about marriage early on, not as a destination, but as a natural extension of our commitment. We didn't want a big wedding, a public spectacle. We wanted something quiet, intimate, meaningful. A city hall ceremony, perhaps, followed by dinner with our closest friends. The plan had been to tell our families after the fact, once it was done, avoiding the drama and the inevitable commentary. Especially from Sarah. I had shared with David, over quiet dinners and long walks, the history of my relationship with my sister, the constant pressure, the subtle cruelty. He had listened, his hand warm in mine, his eyes full of understanding. He knew why I craved privacy, why I dreaded the inevitable spotlight Sarah would shine on any significant life event of mine. The date was set, the following Tuesday, a quiet ceremony at the courthouse. We had the license, the rings, the quiet anticipation. It felt right, authentic, true to us. We had deliberately kept it a secret from everyone, wanting this one important moment to be purely ours, untainted by external expectations or judgments. But Sarah's comment, "At least I have a future husband," delivered with such casual cruelty in front of witnesses, had landed differently than all the previous slights. It wasn't just a jab, it was a public invalidation of my entire future. And, in that moment, something shifted. The quiet plan suddenly felt insufficient. It wouldn't erase the sting of her words. It wouldn't reclaim the dignity she had tried to strip away. Standing there, feeling the heat rise on my cheeks again as she talked about the single women at the wedding, the idea solidified. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a boundary. A statement. It was about taking back the narrative, not in a private moment later, but right here, right now, in the arena she had chosen for her triumph. I had called David during the brief window when Sarah was distracted by a flurry of gift unwrapping. My voice was tight, strained. "David," I whispered into the phone, stepping onto the porch for a semblance of privacy, the sweet scent of roses suddenly nauseating. She did it again. I didn't need to explain who she was. He knew. I quickly recounted the seating chart comment, the casual cruelty, the public humiliation. His voice was calm, steady. "Are you okay?" he asked. Not, "What do you want to do?" Not, "She's impossible," just, "Are you okay?" It was a simple question, but it grounded me. "No," I admitted, the word a ragged breath. "I'm not. I can't. I can't just let this go. Not this time." I told him the idea that had sparked, born of pain and defiance. It was reckless. It was impulsive. It completely blew up our carefully constructed plan for a quiet announcement. But it felt necessary. Vital. A way to reset the balance, to reclaim my space, to show Sarah, irrevocably, that her narrative was wrong. "I need you to come here," I said, the words tumbling out in a rush.
Now. Can
you bring the license?" There was a beat of silence on the other end. I held my breath, half expecting him to say it was crazy, to tell me to just leave, to handle it later. But David understood. He understood the years of subtle abuse, the way it had chipped away at me. He understood that this wasn't just about a seating chart. It was about my fundamental right to exist without being diminished by my own sister. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice low and resolute. "Keep it together for a little longer. I'll be there as fast as I can." Now, standing near the door, watching Sarah basking in the attention, her cruel words still echoing, I felt a new kind of anxiety. Not the anxiety of being judged, but the anxiety of anticipation. The plan was in motion. David was coming. The carefully guarded secret, the quiet foundation of my future, was about to be revealed in the most public way imaginable, not on my terms exactly, but on terms that flipped Sarah's script entirely. The feeling of being trapped intensified, but it was a different kind of trap now. The trap of my own making, the trap of a plan set in motion with no turning back. What would happen when David walked in? How would Sarah react? How would everyone react? The air in the room felt charged, crackling with an energy only I seemed to sense. I glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. How much longer? Every minute felt like an hour. My palms were sweating again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was adrenaline. Sarah had moved on from the seating chart discussion, opening another gift, exclaiming over the delicate china. Her laughter, once bell-like, now grated on my nerves. Every movement she made, every word she spoke, seemed designed to emphasize her perfect, achieved status. And with every passing second, my resolve hardened. She had chosen the weapon, my supposed lack of a future husband. I was simply showing her that her information was outdated.
Spectacularly so.
The thought was audacious, perhaps even cruel in its own way. It wasn't lost on me that I was about to hijack a moment that was supposed to be entirely hers. But the years of her chipping away at me, the constant erosion of my self-worth, the deliberate, public cruelty, it had led me here. This wasn't about ruining her day out of spite. It was about a necessary declaration of independence, a seismic shift in the power dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades. It was about saying, unequivocally, that her judgment held no power over me anymore. That my future was not only secured but had been built quietly, resiliently, away from her destructive gaze. A sudden hush fell over the room near the entrance. All heads turned. My heart leaped into my throat. He was here. David stood framed in the doorway, a quiet presence in the opulent room. He wasn't dressed in a suit, just his usual slacks and a button-down shirt, but he seemed to radiate a calm strength that instantly altered the atmosphere. He held a familiar document holder in his hand. The marriage license. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. Sarah, mid-exclamation over a gift, froze. Her eyes, following the collective gaze of the room, landed on David. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. She didn't know him. He wasn't on the guest list. He wasn't anyone she recognized from her carefully curated world. The room fell silent. All eyes were on David, then on me, then back on David. He met my gaze across the room, a reassuring warmth in his eyes. He smiled, a gentle, loving smile that spoke volumes. Then, he began to walk towards me, cutting across the room, past the tables laden with gifts and flowers, past the stunned faces of the guests. Sarah watched him approach, her confusion deepening into alarm. Her eyes darted from David to me, searching for an explanation. Her mouth was slightly open, her carefully composed expression crumbling. The radiant bride-to-be suddenly looked lost, bewildered. David reached me, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling uncertainty of the room.
He didn't speak.
He simply reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and steady. Then, he turned to face the room, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. He held up the document holder, just slightly, enough for the guests to see the official-looking paper inside. Sarah found her voice, a sharp, brittle sound that cut through the silence.
Who?
"Who is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. She looked at me, her eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing confusion. David turned to her, his expression calm, unreadable. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room.
I'm David.
Sarah stared at him, then at me, then at the license in his hand. The pieces were clicking into place, but the picture they formed was one she couldn't comprehend. Her face drained of color. The smug confidence that had been her armor all afternoon evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. She looked like she had been struck.
What?
"What is that?" she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the license. David looked at the document, then back at Sarah, his expression still calm, almost detached. "This," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority, "is our marriage license. We got married this morning." The words hung in the air, shattering the illusion of Sarah's perfect day. "We got married this morning, not we're engaged, not we're planning a wedding married."
Done.
Already. While she was celebrating her future wedding, I had quietly, deliberately built my actual future. Sarah stared at him, at me, at the license. Her mouth worked, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face completely, leaving it a pasty white. Her eyes, wide with shock, darted around the room, as if seeking confirmation, a denial, anything to refute the reality David's quiet statement had just imposed. The gasps from the guests were audible now, a collective intake of breath that filled the sudden void left by Sarah's silence. Then, she looked back at me, and I saw it. The moment of realization. The understanding of what I had done. Not just gotten married, but done it now like this, here in her space, on her day, immediately after she had used my lack of a future husband as a weapon. Her own words, thrown back at her with devastating precision. At least I have a future husband. Her expression contorted, a grotesque mask of disbelief, humiliation, and pure, unadulterated rage. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had vanished. The carefully constructed edifice of her superiority, built over decades on the foundation of my perceived failures, crumbled in an instant. Her perfect life, her perfect wedding, her perfect future, all suddenly felt less significant, less triumphant, overshadowed by the quiet, undeniable reality of mine. She swayed slightly, her hand going to her chest. The air seemed to rush out of her. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a shriek, but a sudden, limp crumpling of her body onto the polished floorboards, a heap of white lace and shattered illusions. Chaos erupted. Gasps turned into cries of alarm. People rushed forward. My mother shrieked, hurrying towards Sarah's inert form. The perfect bridal shower dissolved into a scene of confusion and panic. I stood there, David's hand still holding mine, a quiet island in the sudden storm. I looked down at Sarah, surrounded by concerned faces, the center of attention once again. But this time, it wasn't the attention she had sought. It was the raw, unvarnished consequence of her own cruelty. There was no triumph in me, not the kind I might have expected. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. And a quiet, cold satisfaction. The game was over. She had lost. Not because I had won some prize she coveted, but because her power had always been contingent on my perceived lack, and that lack no longer existed. My future husband was standing right beside me, our marriage license a simple piece of paper that held more weight, more reality, than all the shimmering artifice of her perfect day. The moments that followed were a blur of hushed voices, concerned faces, and the low murmur of speculation. Guests crowded around Sarah, offering assistance. My mother knelt beside her, her face pale with worry. Someone called for water. Someone else suggested calling a doctor. The perfect bridal shower, the stage for Sarah's latest performance of superiority, had become the scene of her undoing. I remained standing with David, slightly apart from the commotion. His grip on my hand tightened, a silent reassurance. He didn't look at Sarah, his gaze was fixed on me, his eyes full of calm love and support. He hadn't done this out of malice, or even entirely for revenge. He had done it for me, to stand with me, to show me that I was seen, that I was chosen, that my future was real and solid, regardless of my sister's narrative. The focus of the room gradually shifted. While some fussed over Sarah, others turned to look at David and me, their initial shock giving way to curiosity, speculation, and perhaps a touch of awe. The whispers started again, louder this time, urgent. Married? This morning. Her sister? The story was spreading like wildfire through the room, a plot twist nobody had seen coming. Sarah, thankfully, wasn't truly injured. She was disoriented, shaking, her eyes wide and unfocused. The collapse was clearly a physical manifestation of her shock and humiliation, her body reacting to the sudden, total dismantling of her reality. As she was helped to a chair, a glass of water pressed into her hand, her gaze found mine across the crowded room. And in her eyes I saw it. Not just anger, not just humiliation, but a raw, primal hatred I had never witnessed before. The mask was completely gone, revealing the depth of her resentment, the sheer fury that I had dared to step out of the role she had assigned me, that I had achieved the very thing she had used to mock me, and done it in a way that completely undermined her. I didn't flinch. I met her gaze steadily, not with defiance, but with a quiet, unwavering calm. There was no victory dance in my heart, no gloating smile on my face. Just the quiet certainty that this was necessary, that the years of silent endurance had led to this one, decisive moment of reclaiming my own power. David gently squeezed my hand. "Are you ready?" he murmured, his voice low. "Ready to leave? Ready to step out of this drama and into our actual life?" I nodded, my gaze still locked with Sarah's. It felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. The end of a toxic dynamic, the beginning of a life lived fully on my own terms. We turned together, David and I, a single unit, and walked towards the door. The room parted for us, a silent, stunned audience. Nobody spoke. Nobody tried to stop us. The air was still thick, but now it felt less like suffocation and more like the stillness after a storm. As we stepped out of the house, leaving the chaos behind, the late afternoon sun had broken through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light on the world outside. The air felt fresh, clean, breathable. We didn't speak until we reached his car, parked a short distance down the street. Inside the car, the silence was comfortable, companionable. David started the engine, but didn't immediately pull away. He turned to me, his expression gentle. "Are you okay?" he asked again, the simple question still carrying immense weight. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. The tension that had coiled inside me for hours, for years, began to dissipate, leaving behind a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "Yeah," I said, the word feeling light on my tongue. "Yeah, I think I am." He smiled, a genuine, heartwarming smile that reached his eyes. "Good," he said simply. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "You were incredible, standing up to her like that." "I didn't exactly stand up," I said, a faint, tired smile touching my lips. "I just showed her." "Exactly," he said. "You showed her. You didn't get angry, didn't argue. You just presented her with reality. That takes immense strength." I leaned my head against the headrest, closing my eyes for a moment. The image of Sarah's face as she collapsed flashed behind my eyelids. It wasn't a pleasant image, and I felt a pang of something that might have been regret, or perhaps just the lingering ache of a complicated, painful relationship. But it was overshadowed by the feeling of lightness, of finally being free. We drove away from the perfect house, the scene of the dismantled bridal shower. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The world outside felt vast and full of possibility. The aftermath wasn't simple or clean. There were frantic calls from my mother, full of shock and recrimination. There were texts from cousins, some sympathetic, some judgmental. Sarah didn't call. Not then, not ever. The silence from her was louder than any shout. The bridge between us, already fragile, had finally burned down, leaving behind only ash and the acrid smell of betrayal. But I had David. We had each other. Our quiet, real future had begun, built not on public spectacle or the approval of others, but on mutual respect, understanding, and deep love. The marriage license, that simple piece of paper, wasn't just a legal document. It was a symbol of liberation, a declaration that I was no longer defined by my sister's limitations or her cruelty. My worth wasn't contingent on a ring or a date on a calendar. It was inherent, a quiet strength I had cultivated despite, or perhaps because of, the years in her shadow. Walking away from that house, from that life of quiet subjugation, felt like shedding a heavy skin. The scars remained, visible only to me, but they were no longer open wounds. They were reminders of where I had been and how far I had come. My future wasn't just secured, it was vibrant, real, and entirely my own. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest victory. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.